Good morning for the third time already. Welcome again to our conference dealing with artificial intelligence and now focusing more on GPT-3, which is an instrument that is not used only for some amusing intentions. It's something else. It was an, let us say, wow moment, iPhone moment, a new technology on the scene, and the usage of ChatGPT now interviews all the different fields, and I presume that Josef Šlerka will show us also other usages, not only generating essays for school or drafting newspapers articles. There's a lot of work behind larger language models and corpuses. I'm very happy we have Josef Šlerka among us from Charles University. He will tell us something more about the topic. Good afternoon. Let me welcome you to a lecture that was first titled Prompt Engineering or Prompt Wizard, and some thought I designated myself Prompt Wizard or Prompt Engineer. So we renamed the lecture as Condensed Introduction to Prompt Engineering, Applied Theory of a Garden where paths fork out, or Dr. Strange and his concepts. Let me first speak about what are large language models, how do they work. It will not go into depth. It's rather proposing you an alternative that will help you to understand what's inside such large language models. Then I would shortly speak about so-called prompts, continuing with strategies in generating texts. And since we are in this complex world of IT, we will also speak about prompt engineering, what is programming and such, and what's the future of it. The topic is large. Large language models. This is from Midjourney. Human head and face with these language symbols. The picture is not incorrect if you think of it. A large language model, this is an AI trained on a large amount of text data, resulting in a model that generates a natural language, text. Most often we meet such models and GPT-3, BERT or ChatGPT, which are names for different types of models belonging to the same category of models, or sometimes they are just different versions of the same model. What idea should we have of it technically? On technical level, it's in fact a neural network that learns how to complete continuation of a given chain, which in our case is a text, but it can be a chain of different type. And the network, based on a large amount of data, tries to find the optimal internal configuration so that it becomes able, if you give it 3-4 tokens, that it is able to say highest probability of this continuation, middle probability, low probability of continuation of that type. It's been trained on large data sets. Popular statements say that it contains all internet. We know that in model of GPT-3, Wikipedia created a large amount of the data contained. But the concept or the idea we have of it is that it's sort of a whispering instrument. If I remember older telephones with the program T-Knife, you wrote a message and the software was able to complete your sentences. This idea is not completely incorrect because it does something similar, but behind that there is something more scary, and it is that it gives an idea that you can see all, and it's not true. I will offer you a different alternative, a garden with a forking out paths. It's paraphrases of a short story, Vorgese, 4G Genesis. We will speak about it in some other lecture. It's about existence of a book that had different stories inside, and at a certain moment these stories could continue in different ways. One chapter is, for instance, about a man. In the second chapter the man doesn't exist, and in the third chapter the same man is killed, and the reader wonders what path to undertake. And our language models are something similar. You have a large garden where at every cross point there's a certain probability what direction you will take to get to the next cross point. And at the next cross point again there are different options, and you choose one or the other one depending individual probability. And if you came from one direction, it gives you high or low probability how you will continue at the next crossroad. So in principle, it's a large probability space where the levels of probability change depending your behavior. It may sound strange. That's why I have another parallel, and this is Dr. Strange in the Marvel series and his foolish universe world. People exist in different forms, and Dr. Strange moves among those parallel worlds and finds out that things could have developed differently. This is, in fact, a large linguistic model. GPT-3 is nothing else than an enormous generator of many different parallel worlds in which your behavior determines how the evolution will continue. This is the most important message you should take from this lecture. Why? Because in such a world, because this world is not of the type that software works as some graphic chart. This world is not that it is a smarter Wikipedia. It is not a world of existing statements the system has learned correctly or incorrectly. This is a world where several levels coexist depending on previous development. The fact that it understands you is explained by the fact that our language contains some information about the world. Whether the system knows something, it's a tricky question, but we can use Honza Kuwait's parallel. Imagine Platon's cave, people speaking about reflects of shadows on the walls of the cave, and in another cave there is an alien creature listening to people and trying to learn their language, to answer their comments or questions in the way they do. He doesn't see the people, but he tries to learn the way people communicate, and in a way it's learning probability of further development. Our case is more difficult for the fact that this complex neuron network doesn't remember the things. It works as a certain condenser of things it encounters, and based on that it remembers. If I simplify it, if an entity sees repeatedly a series of tokens, of figures, and there is some symbolic token that combines the the individual ones, it's easier to create one's own agent being able to complete it. These are emergent. This is the theory of emergence. Something programs or systems can learn by themselves, something else than they've been programmed for. In practice, it means that we do have a model which at the beginning is blind and deaf, just exists, but we know that by training it, we can teach it by introducing inputs, which are chains or series of tokens, and by doing that, we can get some output. And alongside, we create a nice GPT chat bot, but it could be at the same time a very unpleasant or brutal Caligula emperor type of entity. You could train the system for this as well. So the difference between GPT model and what you see in the form of ChatGPT is just continuation alongside the chain you entered. I use now a Czech poem that says, I know a crystal well where the forest is thickest, where dark ferns grow and red heather grows all around. So the water here murmurs pleasantly, there is otherwise silence, and there is evening dark, heavenly glow everywhere. So this is something that represents different worlds that end up at the border of this beautiful garden. You enter the space by having written the text, which meant for the system that some paths will be very little probable, while other worlds, where the parameters of the world may be much more probable than previous ones. And it brings us to prompt. Prompts are introductory text or series of tokens. They determine orientation or direction and context for the generated text. This is a path in the garden you want to walk up, and in principle these are inputs into a model that determines probability.
And why are they important? Because they influence what you get. The model answers according to your request. And that means if you speak in simple sentences without any context, then you will get a very general answer, and that is logical. Prompt is a way how to lower entropy at the beginning of speaking with it. Prompt is the way to get the output which makes sense, and it is a way to stop in the garden and think about where to go. This is your bearings, and it doesn't matter whether it is a question or a statement, because it's not only about the question mark that makes it different, but it is very important to play roles, because this is how we actually give the command to activate a world. And that's why prompts are products which show what is in it. We know the jailbreaks that actually persuade the system to actually go on in the way which we prefer, but there are also glitches in the system because sometimes the system doesn't know how to repeat it. But because prompt influences the direction of generating, then tones are important, timbre is important, synonyms selected are important. And that is why when we create prompts, we should stick to the rules we use when speaking to a student who has got an issue with his memory. He will remember what you are speaking about. He knows very well what he learned right at the beginning, but he forgets what you discussed with him yesterday. So this is a person who remembers 10 questions you asked him. He doesn't remember what you discussed yesterday. It's ChatGPT, right? And then he remembers somehow how to generate the rest. So you have to tell him what you want, who you are, what the context is. And the best thing is to describe the answer you request. You do not ask him. You are an author and you are actually examiner examining a potential student who wants to study at a college. And if you actually give him or her a very too general task, then you will get a very general answer. If you have geometrical objects on a piece of paper and you ask him to name them, then he will say Jog, Jim and Jenny, and that makes a sense too. But what does it mean? It means that the system has read all print produced worldwide. So you should actually optimize, you should tweak the system, you should actually play with the structure, change the tones and timbre, and then you will see how the result will change. If we have a system in the work, in the way how we generate the tones, how we iterate, how we ask, how we don't ask, that is all included in the prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is a series of strategy how to optimize the orders which we give to the model. And what do we need for it? We need to be clear in asking, in describing the context, in describing the connotations. I understand that IT people might have an issue with it, but this is not a programming language where for each is always for each and nothing else. Experiment. Don't be happy with the first answer, and it is a simulator, don't forget about it. And in ChatGPT, you know that they are supposed to be creative. So sometimes you get different answers. So ask 10 times and then look for similarities between those 10 answers. Examples of actually best practice. Describe how sunflower actually grows, and be clear and concrete. So is it programming? I think it is. We can actually say that prompt engineering is programming, but it's not intuitive, and it uses natural language, and there are some things that play a role. In conventional programming, we need clear, unequivocal referencing for the code, regardless of whether it is Monday or Tuesday. Unlike here, where the language is so ambiguous, connotations, timbre, and somebody told me prompt is very important, as important as the answer. Of course, it is true, because this is how we actually lead it. It's, well, the input is not equal to the output, but don't forget it is a simulator, so we have to ask a lot, we have to change roles, and then we actually have to describe the whole space. And here we see the development of framework of light chain. That means now we attempt to give external information to AI, and the book by Hofstadter will be useful for this context, because this is how our conscience, how our mind works. So, what can we expect in the future? Well, I'm happy I don't need to describe labor markets and other things. I think that we will only speak about high-level languages for prompt concepts. This is what we will see. We will see prompt lungs that will give us the possibility to program. So you will be working with variables, you will be actually creating the loops. This is what you are used to, but you will also search the probability spaces, the simulation, and it will open possibilities for the client research without communicating with the clients, because you will have simulations of various types of clients, and then you will be able to test various responses. And why do we expect this arising? Because we will need abstraction, modularity, flexibility. We are creating templates, and this is the prerequisite for this development. In conclusion, well, I tried to actually offer some parallels and try to search for the way of a strict description of this probability system when we have a matrix, and a sentence that it is how it could develop in a near future. And I hope that you will find some gravity in my lecture. Thank you. Thank you for your lecture or your presentation, and I of course have some questions, but you mentioned something about the prompt lung and ways how to branch out. So could we test some branches just for the experiment per se? Well, we work with it, and we have got projects, and there are projects with simulators, and they are really exciting because you can actually create a series of or set of various worlds, and that seems to me the most exciting way. And how about actually going in the direction of prologue? Yeah, promptlang is a synthetic way, and I have realized that that generation 6 say prologue and SQL is coming back. On the other hand, the managers will never have taken the data themselves from the databases. But what I want to say is that people are not happy about formalistic approach. Sure, yeah. So let me ask you something different. We were speaking about the number of tokens and about ChatGPT, and this model, there are actually some books about it, etc. There are some things in Wikipedia. So what made ChatGPT so popular? Well, it's about the probability distribution and about the capacity to comprise it. So this is a compression algorithm. That's why we said that it was a JPEG of the internet. Well, I don't think this doesn't work really as a description. You see some representations there in Google, and of course there is some role of it, of the corpus, of the body, and now we will see what they will be able to mine from the autonomous systems. But in terms of ChatGPT, what was the most successful feature, or what was the ultimate success, was that ChatGPT was created without the worries that, because you have of course so many technological companies, tech companies, and if you are an established company, you cannot actually come up with something which has got glitches. But if you are a startup, you can actually use the approach of learning by doing. And that was the reason, the root cause for success, because they, the developers, were not afraid of making a mistake. That's why. Well, this is an approach, right? Well, it is. It's not very academic, it's not very business-minded, but that was the atmosphere of the developers. Well, this is a good piece of news, especially for those who work in their garage. Yeah. And I have to say that 1,000 of people have survived and the rest won't probably. Okay, there are those prompt things here up and running. So how would you describe the market, please?
Yes, that's why I mentioned LangChain and the other phenomenon for language processing. Now we are at the stages of impressive growth, and we will see different development in a couple of years. I suppose that in quite a short time, we will see how the systems will be able to stabilize themselves. So there will be a big hype around automobiles, independent automobiles, there will be motivation for academia, because this is in fact an environment where AI focuses is very much debated. There are some minor chapters, as for instance the reproducibility of research, which is useful when you have a security company. Reproducibility is important, and when I promised a long time ago to write something about it, and I haven't done it yet. I'm just joking. Anyhow, it got a bit older, and we also run out of time. Thank you very much for your presentation. I thank you for the invitation. It was a perfect contribution to today's debate.